If the killing of one of Mexico's most powerful drug lords was a show of strength and purpose by the government, so the response has been a show of force by the cartels. Across the country, roads have been blocked, cars and buses torched, banks and shops set on fire by powerful criminal gangs intent on demonstrating their reach and deterring further action against them.
Terrifying, surreal, scary. These are some of the words that American tourist Jim Beck used on Sunday to describe the situation in Puerto Vallarta, a tourist town in Mexico's Jalisco state, as it turns into a war zone.
Watching that Jalisco resort destination transform into an active battlefield. Today is Wednesday, February 25th, 2026. Check the clips surfacing online, and you will see Jalisco is practically incinerated. We are talking about 21 separate roadblocks blazing away. Emergency alarms are wailing, while Guadalajara looks abandoned. Meanwhile, flip on the TV, and you see American and Mexican officials popping champagne. They are hailing El Mencho's demise as a massive win for their combined task force operations. You hear them boasting about billion-dollar orbital surveillance and how the kingpin strategy finally paid off. But while they are busy high-fiving, I am staring at a totally different set of data. I am matching thousands of classified documents from the 2022 Guacamaya hack against the travel history of a mystery woman from just 7 days back. The narrative taking shape here is wild. It makes you confront the real mystery. Was the world's deadliest fugitive taken down by space-age tech, or was it a love note tucked inside a mistress's purse? Listen, I did not come here to parrot what you are already seeing on the major news networks. I have dedicated the last 72 hours to mining through the Sedena military archives, tracing the history of a dying kidney and uncovering a name meant to stay buried. This is the angle they are ignoring during those official press briefings. To really grasp why this week shakes everything up, you need to get inside the head of the man who was killed, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes. To the public, he was El Mencho, but to intel agencies, he was a massive headache. The guy was a phantom. For 15 years, the world's top superpowers tried to track him down, and for 15 years, he was invisible. I have been reviewing old cartel boss files to figure out what set him apart. The difference is night and day. Take El Chapo, for instance. Joaquin Guzman played the role of a superstar outlaw. His ego outgrew his business. He craved the spotlight, meeting up with movie stars in the rainforest, doing interviews with Sean Penn, drinking tequila for the cameras, and sending flirty texts that the feds could easily read. He chased legendary status, and that hunger for clout is exactly why he ended up in handcuffs. Mencho was the inverse. He operated in the dark. He knew that in this era, keeping your mouth shut is the only real protection. No press sit-downs. No posing for the gram. Actually, up until this week, less than 3 verified photos of him even existed, and they were all from 20 years ago. He started as a cop, and he leveraged that academy training to vanish. He understood the hunter's mindset, so he perfected the art of being the uncatchable prey. So, how do you last 15 years with a $15 million price tag on your life? I analyzed the Mexican military's tactical reports, and what I discovered was a blueprint of fanatical discipline. 0 cell phone usage, never sleeping in the same bed 2 nights in a row. He stayed mobile in the Sierra Madre range, a landscape so brutal it eats entire battalions alive. He constructed a so-called ring of steel around his position. We are not talking about a couple of bouncers watching the front gate. It was a complex, military-grade defensive setup. Layer 1 consisted of the halcones, or hawks. This network of lookouts was stationed 10 kilometers out from wherever he was staying. Kids holding walkie-talkies, farmers tending fields, cabbies in the local town. They acted as a surveillance grid. If a convoy rolled out or an unknown vehicle crossed the perimeter, Mencho had a 20-minute head start before they got anywhere near him. Layer 2 was pure brute force. This is where Mencho flipped the script. He did not just hand his guys standard assault rifles. He equipped them for total warfare. You have to look back at the raid in May of 2015. His hitmen did not scatter. They held the line and launched an RPG straight at a Cougar military chopper, blasting it out of the air. The message was loud and clear. "Come at me, and I will swat your birds out of the sky." That intensity established a no-go zone that kept the authorities shaking in their boots for 10 years. Finally, you had the third layer, the inner sanctum. These guys were not your average street gangsters. These guys were ex-special ops, military defectors raking in massive paydays to guarantee total allegiance. Nobody else got anywhere near the chief. But here is the kicker. Uncle Sam dumped billions into spy tech, deploying drones sharp enough to spot a car tag from orbit. They run listening devices capable of snagging a hushed voice on a mobile network. So, why did he remain unfindable? The secret hides beneath the Sierra Madre tree line, where the peaks are blanketed in impenetrable rainforest. While American birds hunt for thermal spots and optical locks, El Mencho kept to the shadows and completely off the radar. Keep your device powered down, and the National Security Agency has zero chance of pinning your location. Avoid open flames, and the sensors catch no thermal data. He beat 21st century tech by living like a pioneer from the 19th century. He scrubbed his electronic trail until zero data remained for them to follow. For 10 years, he was untouchable, a specter torching entire towns while remaining out of reach of law enforcement. Yet every spirit has a flaw. You might evade the DEA and slip past the Mexican Marines, but you cannot outrun your own physiology. For El Mencho, it wasn't a gunshot that pumped the brakes. It was Mother Nature. Let's dig into the medical side. The solitary force Nemesio Cervantes couldn't pay off, intimidate, or murder. Intel files suggested it for ages, circulating rumors about his failing condition up in the hills. However, it took until 2020 for the local paper El Universal to verify what the feds had guessed for a long while. The Globe's top target was fading fast, suffering from terminal renal failure as his kidneys shut down. In the cartel game, getting a chart like that is typically a straight ticket to the grave. Though not for the cause you'd expect, it isn't merely the bodily frailty, it is the supply chain nightmare. Living on the run means relying on velocity. You need the capacity to bolt instantly. You must crash in the dirt, trek through storms, and vanish into the foliage the second choppers approach. Renal collapse steals that liberty, effectively shackling you to a spot. To see why this marked his downfall, look at his next move. A stunt that sounds crazy for a guy dodging the American government. He erected a hospital, and I don't mean a canvas shelter with some bandages. I mean a legit medical center in the small, isolated village of El Cihuatl, deep in the Villa Portificación municipality of Jalisco. Sources suggest he built this ward exclusively for his own use and his top lieutenants. Consider the hubris involved. He felt so secure in his dominion that he laid foundations and set up complex gear right in a war zone. Yet this is the point where the manhunt pivots. Building that clinic was a strategic blunder because it created a stationary target on the grid. For a wraith who lived by constantly moving, establishing a brick-and-mortar site was a huge gamble that handed his pursuers a pinned location. It offered a spot to monitor, and the issue is that dialysis isn't spontaneous. You can't just run a cycle when the mood strikes. The procedure demands a strict, non-negotiable timetable. A guy in his state generally requires care 3 days weekly, like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday rotation. Every visit eats up 3 to 4 hours, and for that entire stretch, you are hooked to a device. While your blood gets siphoned, filtered, and returned, you are stuck, defenseless, and worst of all, easy to forecast. It is not just about the clock either. This treatment needs heavy-duty support systems. You require consistent power for the hardware, not some gas generator that could sputter out halfway through. You need massive amounts of medical-grade water and completely sterile tools. You need a kidney specialist, a pro who can run the rig and manage any emergencies. The sickness compelled El Mencho to overhaul his whole strategy. shifting from a roaming spirit to a grounded invalid. No longer could he disappear into the wildest corners of the Sierra Madre for long stretches. He was forced to hover near his clinic and guarantee that the routes for his medical gear remained unobstructed. Each delivery of fluid created a trail, and every medic hauled up the peak was a possible snitch. Each 4-hour block represented a gap where his safety net was full of holes. The intel community realized this, so they quit hunting a guy sprinting through the forest and began searching for medical facilities. They began tracing the supply chain of a dying patient, creating a paradox that is both captivating and horrifying. The very lifeline keeping him breathing was also the fatal flaw that left him open to being caught. He was stuck in a brutal catch-22, quit the therapy and let the blood toxins kill him slow, or keep the sessions going, stay on the grid, and risk exposure. He opted for survival. He set up a private clinic, flew in specialists, and stuck to a routine, betting his security perimeter could hold while he was tethered to a machine. He wagered his entire operation on the belief that he could play the invalid and the warlord simultaneously. That decision exposes the frantic humanity buried inside the beast, and it prompts a question I need to put to you. Once you strip away the billions in cash and the gold-plated hardware, this boils down to a raw struggle for life. Staying on this path was his undoing, but to see why, we need to rewind to October of 2022. That was the instant the game completely flipped for Mexican authorities. A hacktivist collective called Guacamaya cracked the digital vaults of Sedena, Mexico's National Defense Secretariat. This wasn't some minor leak. We are talking 6 terabytes of top-secret comms, army logs, and intel briefings dumped online for the public to scrutinize. It stands as the most catastrophic cyber disaster in the nation's history. But for reporters like me, it was a gold mine. Overnight, we had a direct line into the military's brain, what they knew, and more critically, what they didn't. I lost days sifting through that data, hunting for any trace of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel among thousands of files. Most of it was routine bureaucracy, troop rotations, fentanyl busts, and arrests of low-level scouts. Then, buried deep in the high-level assessments of the cartel's inner circle, a fresh name popped up. It wasn't a surname from the legendary crime dynasties, no Guzman, no Valencia. It was a name totally absent from treasury blacklists or wanted posters, Guadalupe Moreno Carrillo. I actually had to verify the spelling when I caught it. Who was she? And why was she flagged in classified army dispatches? Those files uncovered a fascinating detail about how El Mencho organized his private world. We always assumed his wife, Rosalinda, was the only female power player, which was true regarding the money. Rosalinda was the financial wizard, the kingpin laundering the cash. But come 2022, she was behind bars. With her locked up, the question remained, who was looking after the boss? The Guacamaya leaks didn't peg Guadalupe Moreno Carrillo as a trafficker, but as a facilitator. Her job wasn't moving product, it was moving comfort. Intel tagged her as the logistics manager for his day-to-day existence up in the Sierra Mountains. Consider what that job actually means for a fugitive she was the one planning his menus. She ensured his clothes were laundered and managed the rotation of maids and chefs, all of whom were hooded during transport up the peaks. Crucially, however, the reports pinpointed her as the gatekeeper of his medical care. She acted as the conduit, guaranteeing the timely arrival of dialysis solutions. She oversaw the delivery of specialized groceries essential for keeping a kidney patient alive. Here is the kicker. One of those leaked memos contained a shocking confession from the army. The brief basically admitted they had lost all eyes on El Mencho because his security was impenetrable. He was a ghost, no radio chatter, no cell pings, not even a thermal footprint to track. Yet, the file highlighted a strategic pivot. They admitted that while they couldn't tail the Phantom, they could tail his caretaker, a textbook spycraft move known as pattern of life analysis. You stop hunting the fortress and start hunting the supply line. El Mencho might shun technology, but the supply chain for his meds requires communication. So the military built a dossier on Guadalupe Moreno Carrillo and began charting her every step. They monitored where she traveled, who she talked to, and what she bought. Each supply run into the municipality of Villa Purificación generated a fresh data point. Whenever she arranged a gear drop at a secluded hut, she was practically drawing a roadmap for intel analysts. In her mind, she was simply acting as a loyal companion. She figured she was just nursing a sick man, assuming that since she wasn't ordering hits or moving contraband, she was invisible to the government. She couldn't have been more wrong. Desperate to catch the boss, the feds flipped his dependence on her into his biggest weak spot. They figured out that wherever Guadalupe showed up, El Mencho was nearby or expecting her. She was the single fixed point in a formula meant to be uncrackable. Basically, the girlfriend turned into a homing signal. She had no clue she was painting a bullseye on herself every single time she trekked up those peaks. So, you have this phantom in the hills, the sickness dragging him down, and the lover who accidentally paved the way for the airstrikes. But thinking that is the full picture means ignoring the biggest chunk of the riddle. You are overlooking the matriarch. To get the real ending of this drama, we need to discuss Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia. In the criminal underground, they just call her La Jefa the Boss. And folks do not use that title to be sweet. She earned that rank through cold, hard financial genius. Rosalinda isn't merely El Mencho's spouse. She is the sister of the Quenis, a brotherhood the Drug Enforcement Administration ranks as the richest narcotics traffickers on the planet. While El Mencho acted as the armed enforcer, waging battles and blasting choppers out of the sky, Rosalinda and her siblings ran the corporate suite. They were the ones scrubbing billions clean using property, resorts, and legal fronts. They were the vault. But this is where the schedule gets crucial. And I need you to focus on the calendar because the timing is almost too convenient. Back in November of 2021, Mexican forces grabbed Rosalinda during a high-stakes raid in Zapopan. They locked her up, effectively severing the organization's financial head from its armed body. She spent 3 years in a Fed lockup, viewing the kingdom through iron bars. Then, February 2025 rolled around. Just about 1 year ago exactly, Rosalinda walked free. The court logic was messy health problems, shaky proof on specific counts, but the outcome was plain as day. She was back in the game. She was loose. Now, step into her heels for a second. You are a woman who spent decades constructing a legacy. You get out of the clink, and what greets you? You find your husband, the monarch, falling apart fast. His kidneys are shutting down. He is frail. He is exposed. But even worse, he isn't solo. He is getting nursed by another woman, Guadalupe Moreno Carrillo. It is not just about a lover's spat. In the cartel game, being close means being in charge. The one swapping out the dialysis fluid is the one whispering to the chief. Whoever holds the meds holds the man. Rosalinda would have spotted immediately that Guadalupe wasn't merely a caregiver or a girlfriend. She was a sentry. She posed a massive danger to the estate. If El Mencho croaked while completely under his mistress's thumb, who gets the account passwords? Who gets the GPS coordinates for the buried money pits? Would they go to the devoted spouse who did 3 years hard time? Or the lady holding his hand up in the hills? For someone like Rosalinda, protecting the Valencia clan, that gamble is a no-go. You do not construct a billion-dollar kingdom just to see it slide to a side piece at the buzzer. This leads us to the creepiest rumor floating around intel circles today. A theory claiming El Mencho's takedown wasn't just a bust, it was a cleanup job. Look at the 12 months between February 2025 and February 2026. That was the year Rosalinda took back the reins. That was the year data on Guadalupe's location suddenly got razor sharp. Could it be that the leaks about the girlfriend's hideout didn't come from a cyber breach, but a snitch? The spy game has this concept known as a controlled burn. Sometimes, to save the woods, You gotta torch a few trees. If Rosalinda figured her hubby was already a goner, that the renal failure was fatal regardless, he wasn't an asset anymore. He was baggage. Him staying loose meant more eyes on them, more pressure, and the mistress keeping her claws in him. But a dead husband? He is a myth. And a corpse cannot rewrite a will. A deceased spouse cannot hand the crown jewels to a lover. Best of all, if the feds neutralize him, the wife plays the mourning widow, not the accomplice. It is the ultimate power grab. You eliminate the other woman by guiding drones right to her porch. You take out the dying chief before he does something stupid. You lock down the inheritance for your kids, making sure the cash stays in the Valencia bloodline, even if the Oseguera side loses the battle. Viewing it through that scope, the Tapalpa raid looks less like an arrest and more like a changing of the guard. It breaks down exactly how he ended up completely exposed. It clarifies how the defense net collapsed and why the kingpin went down merely a year after his queen came back. This hypothesis forces you to rethink what allegiance really means in such a cutthroat game. We all love the ride or die story, but put billions on the line, and romance is usually the first thing to get tailored for a coffin. I've got to put this to you because it's the one puzzle piece keeping me awake while I pore over these dossiers. Would a spouse trade her partner to secure the kid's trust fund? Or is that just tinfoil hat talk? I want your opinion. To make sense of the finale, we need to pull up the charts. We need to zero in on the exact spot where a 15-year chase hit a wall, because that pin drop reveals just how frantic those last moments were. This takedown didn't go down in some cavern or a subterranean bunker hidden beneath deep foliage where the skycams can't peep. It went down in Tapalpa. And anyone familiar with Jalisco knows Tapalpa isn't exactly a fortress. It's designated a pueblo mágico, a magic town. It's basically the Hamptons for the Guadalajara elite looking for a weekend break. Think cobblestones, towering pines, high-end lodges, and cozy hearths. It's wine-sipping country. The absolute last spot you'd look for the head of the hemisphere's most ruthless paramilitary squad. So, why the risk? Why abandon the impregnable Sierra Mountains for a tourist trap packed with civilians and paved highways? The intel report greenlighting the raid on the night of February 21st, 2026 points to two key drivers, and both loop right back to the vulnerabilities we've been talking about: his crumbling physique and his complicated love life. The first angle is purely medical. Insiders suggest the boss hit a critical low. His renal function was tanking faster than the mobile gear in the bush could manage. He required a controlled setting. He needed sanitation, steady voltage for the filtration unit, and hygiene levels you just don't find in a dirt floor hideout. Tapalpa had posh cabins with a solid grid. He basically wagered his existence on blending in for a single night just to filter his system. The second possibility is all about the cash and involves Guadalupe. Rumor has it this was a handoff meet. If the Don knew the end was near, he had to physically pass over the encryption keys, the accounting books, and the credentials for buried treasure run by his lover. You don't broadcast that stuff over airwaves the feds are monitoring. You do it eye to eye, by the fire, while time runs out. The following events were a textbook lesson in tracking, but with a curveball. The eyes in the sky weren't pinging the boss's cell because he didn't carry one. They weren't locked on his thermal ghost because he hadn't moved in ages. They were tailing her. Around 11 o'clock that night, February 21st, high-flying drones spotted a 3-car heavy transport snaking up the switchbacks toward the town. The thermal bloom from those engines stood out like a flare in the freezing altitude. Intel pros staring at monitors in Mexico City and D.C. clocked a specific behavior with this group. They drove with combat-ready defensive tactics, gunning it through bottlenecks, braking to sweep the crossroads. But this wasn't the usual 50-truck war party. It was a tight, low-profile escort crew. The read was instant. It's the lady. She's en route to the mark. They let them roll through. They let her guide them straight to the front porch. The trucks pulled into a private, upscale estate on the town's edge, ringed by towering timber. The thermal blobs halted, the motors began to fade, and for the next 4 hours, the place went black. The strike team didn't kick the door. They held back. They pinpointed the coordinates. They utilized infrared tech to peer right through the cabin structure. They spotted a particular ground floor chamber, giving off a unique thermal pattern. The consistent, pulsing glow of medical electronics running full tilt. They had him zeroed. They knew he was wired to that console. He was on a leash. At 4 a.m. on February 22nd, the green light flashed. No siege tactics here. This was a precision snatch and grab. Mexican special ops, backed by the National Guard on the ring, swarmed the property. They didn't spray and pray. They blew through the exact wall of the exact room where that dialysis pump was whirring. The skirmish was fierce but brief. The security detail got caught flat-footed. They were drilled for bush warfare, not a dynamic entry into a plush suite while their chief was out of commission. Once the dust settled and troops breached the interior, the visual didn't match a Hollywood drug blockbuster. You didn't see some warlord brandishing a gold-plated rifle, howling from a rooftop. Instead, they found a withered, ailing patient unhooked from life support amidst a tangle of IV lines. That's when things get complicated. The soldiers didn't stumble upon a fighter. They discovered a man on his deathbed. Dawn was barely cracking the Sierra Madre skyline when the comms buzzed with the update. It was the confirmation both nations had chased for 15 years. Asset captured. At 5:30 a.m. on February 22nd, Army officials verified Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes was detained, pulse active, lungs working, wrists shackled. For a fleeting moment, roughly 20 minutes, the globe thought the kingpin was finally down for the count. The playbook was straightforward. Grab the HVT, rush him to a locked-down military runway, and airlift the guy to the capital to get booked, grilled, and ultimately sent stateside. However, 20 minutes in, the script flipped. Government reports claimed the captive's condition tanked mid-flight. They blamed the shock of the raid, mixed with severe renal failure, for triggering a fatal shutdown. When the bird landed, the boss was gone. Yet, this is where the map fights the press release. Tapalpa sits in Jalisco state, about 80 miles south of Guadalajara, the country's second biggest metro area. That city boasts elite trauma units, teaching hospitals, and experts capable of saving a critical patient in under 30 minutes. If the goal was preserving the planet's biggest intel source, you'd load him into an EMT rig heading north, or chop him 5 minutes to the closest urban center. You don't strap a terminal patient into a Blackhawk for a 400-mile trek to the capital. That route demands 90 minutes over high-elevation peaks. That's when I began doubting the government line. You need to view this as political self-preservation, not just a medical emergency. A living El Mencho is an information nuke. Consider the scale he constructed a $50 billion dynasty. You don't achieve that without powerful allies. Moving that much weight requires greasing the palms of governors, generals, judges, and top cops. If he ends up taking the stand in a federal court in Brooklyn, same as Chapo, he's going to sing. He'll outline the payoffs. He'll reveal the backroom deals cut with the state. He'd lay bare the systemic corruption. But a corpse? That's just a trophy on the wall. It's a talking point for the president. It's a big win for the DEA to brag about. Crucially, he stays quiet. A deceased Don takes his bribery ledger to the coffin. So, was bypassing the local ER for a long flight a screw-up? Or was it a deliberate choice to let him expire? Did his heart actually give out on that chopper? Or was treatment conveniently withheld? Then there's the dangling thread, the phantom. Guadalupe Moreno Carrillo. Amidst the raid confusion, her name evaporated from the records. Early intel reports placed her at the scene. Thermal scans confirmed her presence, yet the booking sheet only lists the boss and 2 nameless heavies. So where did she go? Did she sneak out the back into the woods while troops kicked in the front door? Doubtful, considering the ironclad perimeter the army allegedly set up. Or are we looking at something shadier? Guadalupe knew where the cash was stashed. She held the keys to the vault that Rosalinda was desperate to reclaim. Taken alive, she becomes a witness. Dead? She's just collateral damage. But if she just vanished, then her secrets could quietly change hands. There's talk, unverified but steady, that a second bird lifted off that morning. A smaller craft, one that didn't head for the capital, carrying a very living passenger holding the passwords to the treasury. The resulting picture is almost too clean. The kingpin is gone, eliminating any messy trials. The queen reclaims her seat with enemies gone, and the state gets to brag about slaying the beast without facing the ugly truth of his creation. It circles back to the oldest rule in the underworld. It's a cliche for a reason. Dead men tell no tales. So, I need your honest take. Do you believe his kidneys failed on that flight? Or did someone help him along to ensure his permanent silence? Was this a medical tragedy? Or was it the final necessary step in a controlled burn? Let me know what you believe in the comments down below. Because from where I'm sitting, the official story has more holes in it than the chopper he went down in. So here we are. It's 3 days later. Smoke is still choking the skyline over Guadalajara. Politicians in D, C, and Mexico City are shaking hands, pinning medals on chests, and declaring the end of an era. But as I close out these files, the Guacamaya leaks, the Sedena reports, the hospital blueprints, I'm left with a totally different picture of what just went down. I've spent this whole journey trying to separate the myth from the man. And what I found is that the official narrative is just a comfortable lie. They want you to believe El Mencho fell because the state had bigger guns. They want you to think billion-dollar spy satellites and joint task forces finally outsmarted the criminal mastermind. But that's not what the evidence says. When you strip away the press conferences and look at the raw data, you realize El Mencho didn't lose this war because the US Marines kicked in his door. He didn't lose because a Predator drone put a Hellfire missile through a bunker roof. He lost because of two things. No amount of money, power, or violence can fix: biology and psychology. Let's look at the biology first. For 15 years, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes was a ghost, untraceable. But the second his kidneys started failing, he ceased to be a ghost and became a patient. You can't run a paramilitary empire while you're tethered to a dialysis machine for 12 hours a week. That machine was his anchor. It forced him to build a hospital. It forced him to stay in Tapalpa. It forced him to rely on a medicine supply chain that could be tracked. His own body betrayed him way before the first soldier breached that room. And then there's the psychology, specifically, the psychology of the women in his life. We often look at cartels as these hyper-masculine clubs. But in this case, the fate of the most powerful man in the Americas was decided by a domestic dispute. Guadalupe Moreno Carrillo, the mistress, was the key. She was the one who created the digital trail. She was the one who led the drones right to the doorstep. But you have to ask yourself, who turned that key? I keep circling back to the timeline of Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, the wife, the queen. She sits in a prison cell for 3 years, watching her husband's health fail and watching another woman take her spot at his side. She gets released in February of 2025. Exactly 1 year later, almost to the day, her husband is dead. Her rival is gone, and her family's financial future is locked down. That is not a coincidence. That is a hostile takeover. The intel suggests El Mencho wasn't caught. He was served up. He was sacrificed on the altar of the business. Rosalinda and the Queen's clan likely realized a dying leader is a liability, but a dead legend is an asset. By allowing the mistress to be the one who accidentally leaked his location, they killed 2 birds with 1 stone. They removed the husband before he could lose the money, and they framed the mistress for the fall. And that brings us to the real takeaway of this whole saga. It's not about banned substances. It's not about borders. It's about human frailty. The lesson here is chilling. In the world of organized crime, your body and your heart are bigger liabilities than the DEA. You can armor plate a truck, but you can't armor a failing organ or a jealous partner. El Mencho dropped millions on gold-plated .50 caliber rifles to shoot down helicopters, but he couldn't buy a new pair of kidneys. And he couldn't buy loyalty from a wife who saw her inheritance slipping away. So, I want to know what you think. I really want to hear your perspective on this. Do you buy the official story of a lucky satellite find during a medical emergency on the chopper? Or do you believe in the medical trap theory? Do you think he was betrayed by his own biology and the women in his life? Drop a comment below. I read all of them, and I really want to see if you guys are spotting the same patterns I am. As for what happens next, check the news. Jalisco is burning. The power vacuum is being filled with violence as splinter cells fight for control. The government is celebrating, but the people are hiding in their homes. Rosalinda is sitting in silence, likely surrounded by lawyers, secure in her position as the grieving widow. But there's one loose thread that keeps nagging at me. There are rumors, just whispers in the intel community right now, that Guadalupe Moreno Carrillo was seen crossing the border into Guatemala yesterday. And she wasn't empty-handed. They say she has the encryption keys to the Swiss accounts El Mencho handed her in those final hours. So if that holds up, the battle is far from done. It is simply under new management. Appreciate you watching. If you dig this sort of intensive research, go ahead and subscribe. It helps me uncover the records that corporate news sweeps under the rug. I will catch you in the next one with the latest developments. Meanwhile, take care, keep searching, and never stop challenging the narrative.
Behind the billion-dollar fortresses and the gold-plated weaponry of Nemesio El Mencho Cervantes lies a chilling, universal truth. Power is a ghost, and shadow empires are built on sand. For 15 years, the world's most feared man lived as a phantom, outsmarting satellites and outrunning armies. Yet, in the end, he couldn't outrun his own heartbeat. The King of the Sierra wasn't toppled by a high-tech missile, but by the quiet, relentless decay of his own biology. This is the ultimate equalizer. You can command legions, but you cannot negotiate with a failing organ. More tragic still is the lesson of betrayal. In a world where loyalty is bought with blood and silver, the heart becomes the greatest liability. Surrounded by riches, El Mencho died tethered to a machine, caught between a wife protecting an inheritance and a mistress serving as a homing beacon for his enemies. The takeaway is clear. A life built on violence and greed offers no sanctuary. It strips you of the only things that truly matter: genuine love, peace of mind, and a dignified legacy. True strength isn't found in a rifle. It's found in the integrity of one's character. In the pursuit of a hollow crown, El Mencho lost his humanity long before he lost his life.